everyone. I'm Gina Watts, and with me is the incomparable Andrew McPeak.
Hey, Gina, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. If you believe that school should be more than just essays and GPAs, if you believe that EQs are as important as IQs, if you expect amazing things from the next generation, then friends, you are in the right place because we believe that too.
Epic. In fact, not only was that epic, I think this whole podcast is going to be epic.
That's right, Andrew. It is going to be epic. And today we're going to kick it off with our weekly question. So what's a job that you'd think you'd be terrible at and why? I'd like you to go first. It might give me a little time to think.
The self-reflection that these questions require every week is just next level. I hope that our listeners are answering these questions along with us. But what's a job you'd be terrible at and why? I actually knew this immediately because I am in content, so I'm writing all the time and creating things and presentations and all of that stuff. And I learned a long time ago that grammar is not my friend. So the answer is easily copy editor.
Okay.
I have always hired a copy editor or brought in somebody else to copy edit because grammar and especially spelling, I don't know what it is, but it's like I've written this word, heard this word, seen this word a million times, but I am asked to spell it and it's like, is there a Y in there? I don't know.
That's so funny. I've heard that a lot about authors, about writers in general, that like spelling
it's almost like it's a different part of your brain.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
that's funny.
Yep.
Maybe that's why I don't write a lot anymore because I can spell, friends.
Yeah.
I can spell.
You're the grammarian.
Yeah.
All right, what was your answer?
I don't know about that. You know, I was sitting here reflecting. I think it would be anything to do with technology and fully understanding how it works. Like
you'll never find Gina in IT.
No, I think I have entered into a season of life that I am my parents. It's
happened.
It's happened.
Did you just like look up one day and went, wow, I don't know how any of this works?
I think so. Because I was like, one day I was looking at my staff or my child, somebody, and I was just like, can you just do this for me? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. So, yeah. But I think that's it.
Amazing.
No tech.
Well, you and I should definitely not do these jobs. But I think we're pretty good at hosting a podcast.
I mean...
Not that we would toot our own horns, but it's not like there's anybody here with a microphone to contradict us. So
we'll just go with it.
We will, yes. Well, I mentioned earlier this podcast was going to be epic. I meant that quite literally. But that word actually has extra meaning for us at Growing Leaders. It's an acronym, EPIC, that we've been using here for a long time. In fact, I think the first book Tim ever put it in was Generation IY, which he wrote in 2010, so years ago. But EPIC represents the 4 elements of engaging and effective leadership, especially leadership of the next generation. So my OG Growing Leaders folks are going to be familiar with this idea.
Can you tell us what those 4 guiding principles or elements are?
Yeah. So whenever we say we want to practice epic leadership, we're talking about 4 things. E stands for experiential. So in what ways are you creating experiences? Not just, a sage on the stage with a lecture, but a guide on the side, somebody who's coming along and going, let me give you a chance to figure this out or experience it for yourself. P stands for participatory. So this is a leader who lets other people participate. And in fact, they participate to such a degree that they shape the conversation itself.
Great.
And when leaders and teachers do this, they create really engaging classrooms. So experiential, participatory. The third one's fun, image rich. We just learned a long time ago that images are the language of the 21st century, right? We don't send words back and forth. Kids are sending memes and GIFs and emojis and memojis and all those kinds of things. And so we just recognize if we live in an image-rich world and a picture is worth 1,000 words, why don't we use images to communicate the principles we want to communicate?
Let's pause there for just 1 second.
Yeah.
Because if Tim put this in a book in 2010, I would argue that image-rich communication it was starting then, but it wasn't like it is now.
It's only ramped up since then.
And he already had that foresight to...
Absolutely.
Good to be mentored by smart people.
Indeed.
Anyways, sorry.
I'm regularly thankful for that. So we talked about experiential, participatory, image-rich. The final word is connected. And this is really about relationships. Are you creating opportunities for connection in the space where you're leading? And that's connection between the teacher and the student, but it's also connection student to student, right? Are you stopping and giving opportunities for individuals to connect face to face, Kids will say they hate it at first, and then it'll become the thing they most look forward to over time because we all have a desire for relationships.
For sure. Well, I am very excited. I know our audience, if you guys have been rocking with us, you're like, Gina, you're always excited. Man, I am.
It's just who you are, though. It's authentic.
I was going to say, Andrew can tell you, it kind of is who I am most of the time. But we are going, going to be thinking about and talking about epic. And we're thinking about epic tales from school leaders, teachers, and staff. We're going to highlight for you some stories of school leaders who are doing an amazing job engaging the next generation in schools. Andrew, I think you might have a story to share first.
Yeah, so each of us is going to share a story today, and we're also going to tie it back to a principle that we think is kind of the driving force behind these ideas. But the story that I thought of that came to mind is a friend of mine, a school leader that I met years ago as a part of my work. Her name is Julie Diaz. She has since retired, but what she was able to do at her school called Travis High School, just outside of Houston, Texas, several years ago, to me is a perfect picture of epic styles of leadership, as well as the principle that we're talking about today. Julie was the principal of a couple of different schools. And at that point, the kind of point right before she came to Travis, she was actually over a middle school that had become a national school of character. So she is like nationally recognized, the school that she's created, the culture that she has. And she's got just a few years left in her career. And somebody comes to her from her district and goes, hey, you wouldn't by chance want to leave this really good situation you've created for yourself and go over to our most struggling school in the district, would you? And not only that, it's also a gigantic school. Travis High School has almost 4,000 high school students.
Wow.
Which is craziness. That's something
it's
that
a little city.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that feels like it only happens in Texas and California and Florida. But so they have this gigantic school. They have all kinds of issues, disciplinary instances, truancy, GPAs aren't great, graduation rates aren't great. And Julie goes and kind of walks through the school and decides, I'm taking this on. I believe she was there for 5 years before she retired. But her first year, she decided, I'm going to just kind of basically start from the ground up. The biggest issue she noticed was student engagement. She actually called them, she had these acronyms for things. Bibs and Bobs is what she used to call them. Bibs stands for bodies in the building.
Okay.
And this is the kids who showed up to school, but they didn't go to class.
Okay.
So they made it to the building.
Bib.
They did not make it to the classroom. The Bobs are the bodies out of the building. So these are the kids who just said, you know what, I'm not even going to show up, right? That's where your truancy issues are. And she just realized there's not a lot of ownership going on in this building right now. How do I create it? Well, she knew, just being honest, she walked in and saw that the staff was not really engaged. She was like, I could try and change the staff and push and get teachers to start doing things differently, but it's just going to be like running into a brick wall all year long. She said, you know what? I recognized immediately that there were some unique and amazing student leaders in this school. Not a ton of them, but they were there. And she was like, I'm going to start from the ground up. This is going to be a grassroots change from the ground up. So she gets on the announcements one day, a couple months into her tenure there, and says, I'm creating a student leadership program. Any student in the entire school is welcome to apply. You have to apply, fill out an application. Of course, every student that applied, she accepted, right? But she wanted to kind of make them put in, that that
like
little
it's exclusive.
Effort.
Yeah.
Exactly. She has 85 kids who sign up for the first time of 4,000, so not a massive amount. But she just said, I'm going to focus this year on pouring into these students who say, I am a leader. And that's exactly what she did. And this is how we found her, because she started using our Habitudes as a part of that. She was doing John Maxwell stuff. She was doing whatever she could find.
Yeah.
She was developing these kids. She'd get them once a week during lunch and just pour into them and develop them and all of that. And she kept telling them, this is your school. This is your school. This is your school. Well, that leader group grows. Year 2, it goes from 80 to almost 300 students. And by that time, those leadership students are starting to feel like, this is my school, And so they start coming up with ideas, things they want to do, changes they want to make, all that kind of stuff. And it leads to an incredible year 2, where that's actually the year that Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, Texas. The students call the teachers when this happens and says, we got to do something. And they said, okay, what do you want to do?
Wow.
The students start organizing community cleanups. So they mobilize their fellow students and start engaging that. They decide they want to do an extreme makeover of their school.
Hey.
And so that
was one of my favorite TV shows, by the way.
Yes, it is a great TV show. So they raise a bunch of money and they get paint and supplies donated. And they themselves on a Saturday paint the entire downstairs of the school. So stuff like this just starts happening. And by year 3, Julie starts to challenge these students. What would it look like if you, now that you've been developed as a leader, started developing other students as a leader? And they were like, this sounds awesome. We'd love to do that. So she goes to the teachers for the first time, and the only thing she asks is, could some of my student leaders come take up some of your class time and develop some students in your class? And of course, the teachers are going, free period,
Yes.
I don't have anything to do. But she knew exactly what she was doing, because what happened is once the teachers saw these student leaders
Right.
and what they were communicating, they're teaching each other habitudes, they're teaching each other leadership principles, whatever it is. And these teachers are blown away by these student leaders, and they start standing kind of next to them up front and going, man, I love this principle. In fact, that reminds me of this thing. And they start talking about leadership. And pretty soon, the entire school is involved in leadership development. It happened in a very short time. Guess what else happened? Discipline issues drop, like fall to the floor. Truancy starts to not become a problem. Graduation rates start climbing. All of this because Julie decided, I'm going to make an impact here, and I'm going to not focus on bringing in some crazy speaker who's going to come make it, or start some program and just throw it at my teachers, but I'm instead going to look at where are my opportunities and start to build. And then she saw that change happen that she wanted to see.
That's such a great story.
Isn't that cool?
And she's such an incredible leader.
She is, yes.
Yeah.
She and I still follow each other on Twitter and send messages back and forth.
I was going to ask you if you were still in contact with her.
I am. She's an incredible leader. She's now teaching other teachers in her quote-unquote retirement.
Yeah.
As I find that most educators don't ever fully retire.
Never.
They're still teaching and leading all kinds of things, and that's exactly what she's doing. Julie's story actually reminds me, that's the whole reason I told it, of the metaphor that we're kind of leaning on today. It's actually one of our habitudes. We call it splashes and waves.
Hey.
People probably saw that in the title of this podcast and went, what the heck are these guys talking about? If you think about the difference, right, we've all been to the ocean. At least I hope most people have been to the ocean. Yeah. And so you've seen the difference between a splash and a wave, right? If you throw a rock into the ocean, you'll get a splash. It makes a big to-do, but it goes away really fast. And that's often a very common leadership style, right? You're like, I want to change my students' lives. So you plan a leadership day or you plan a weekend retreat, right? And it makes a splash. It's really fun for that moment. We're very event-driven people, I find, right?
We are.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but the reality is if the goal is change, then you don't want to pursue a splash that just makes a momentary impact. You actually want to pursue a wave, right? So you think about what is a wave? That wave has been, when it arrives at the sea or at the shoreline and hits the sand, it has been coming for miles and miles and miles and miles. It's been building over time. And that's the difference between a splash and a wave is splash leaders try and make a quick impact. Wave leaders start small and they build over time and they see that their impact goes farther than you could possibly imagine, way farther than a splash is actually going to go. I think many leaders step up on a platform and simply make a splash. Anybody can do that. Nothing ultimately changes. But what we call life-giving leaders, those people who are pouring into other people and creating long-lasting change, those leaders make waves. Their work and their words ignite movements that mobilize staff, faculty, and students to become the best versions of themselves.
It reminds me a little bit of a mentor I had in my undergraduate career. So my undergraduate degree is from the same place that I was eventually able to teach in higher ed. And so I was able to have that same mentor for good chunk of my life. Anyways, he told me, I had come to him with an idea for a project. He told me, Gina, I don't fund festivals, fun, or food. And he said, and then he added T-shirts. He hated that it wasn't an F because of alliteration, but he was like, don't come to me with that. And it's the same principle, is that he wanted to see
I'm going to do
demonstrated
something that,
changes. I was like, I don't like you, but okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would love to challenge our listeners to ask this question. Like when you think about your own change you're trying to initiate in the school, are you doing things that are kind of splash kind of effects, little weekend things, or perhaps this little event, or I got everybody a T-shirt at the beginning of the year, or are you looking and spending your time, investing your resources into students and staff who are building towards actual long-lasting change. That's really the principle behind it.
Yeah.
Well, I know you also thought of a story. Both of us are
do,
thinking about
yeah.
epic stories. So would you share that with us?
When I think of splashes and waves, there's really this one specific story that comes to mind. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I might have shared that a time or two here. And living there, I had the pleasure of working with several K through 12 schools and some universities. Because I was an often called upon speaker and trainer in the region and had connections to other speakers and trainers locally and nationally, a friend of mine reached out to me who was serving as a career counselor at a high school. And he had reached out to me to ask for some assistance in finding the right speaker to kick off the school year for the students, the staff, and the faculty where he worked. And so now being me, I said, sure. Also being me, I had some questions. I wanted to know the vision. I wanted to know the budget. I wanted to know audience size and type, length of presentation, desired outcomes, like all that speaker stuff.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to help them, but I needed some answers.
Yeah.
His response was, well, gee, we have $25,000 from a grant. I need someone to come in and really knock it out of the park. Who do you know? I need to pause here with a warning. What I'm about to say is only reserved for my very close friends when they ask me questions like this. I would not say this professionally to someone seeking assistance from me.
No.
Okay?
Because you would go, you've got a grant.
Yeah.
I'm happy to come for that grant.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So time in. Okay. We're back.
Yeah.
So I said to my friend, excuse me, who do I know? I just talked to the perfect person today. And he was like, well, great. I knew all I needed to do was call you. Who do you got? And my response was, me, fool. Like, are you crazy?
Yeah.
Like, why?
You obviously thought of me to solve your problem. Let me solve your problem.
Hello. And so anyways, we laughed about it. But honestly, for that moment, it allowed him to open his eyes. And it helped me to help him and their school rethink their strategy for how they could use funds to better or best serve their school. So this quick convo was the first meeting that led to a brainstorming session that then led to a meeting with the career and guidance office. And at that time, there weren't career/guidance offices. There were just like traditional guidance counselors, at that time. So they were already being pretty innovative with having a career counselor on staff that was solely devoted to talking about career development, a proposal to the principal and superintendent, and then a presentation to the school board. So there were some steps that needed to happen, but ultimately the proposal that was developed was adopted. And we went from spending like $25,000 on one speaker to fly in and fly out with no plans to remain committed to or connected to the school to a multi-year agreement with an expert in student success who, in collaboration with the Career and Guidance Office and students, co-developed a student ambassador leadership program for students in 9th through 12th grade. Now, the first year, thinking back on it, the focus was on creating and implementing the program with the consultant co-laboring with the staff and students, creating like sustainable systems and infrastructure so that the work could keep going beyond contribution of the consultant. You still don't want, like, the splash is still a splash if somebody just comes in, even if they come in for a year and then they leave and their work goes with them.
Yeah.
And doesn't have lasting impact in the infrastructure of the school. But, we started off talking about epic. And when I think about this story, I think about those 4 elements and the things that happened in that school in that year and actually over the course of the several years to follow. So, a couple of the experiences that happened. There was weekly leadership skill building sessions before the first bell, based off of John Maxwell's material, working sessions with career and guidance office staff to complete projects. The students were able to be visited by several local employers to learn about various careers and industries. They completed personality assessments to learn more about themselves. They developed career plans with detailed goals and steps to reach them. They had a lot of experiences. So earlier when we were talking about, you don't want to just have activities or experiences that last for a moment. You could have them within a strategic type experience that build upon each other, right? There's like a step, there's a next step, and there's a value that's being added that's a long-term impact. Participation, is the P in EPIC. And some of the participation that the students and the staff and faculty did was, weekly leadership sessions, but also ones that the students were teaching. So they had the opportunity to do peer teaching sessions. students developed and led a career exploration session for fifth graders. It was their idea. They wanted to serve the rising sixth graders who were going to move from elementary school to middle school. And so they developed a life-size game of Guess Who for the students to learn about various careers. So they came dressed as the Guess Who characters. If you have never played the game Guess Who, just Google it. But it was funny, but it was great. The students loved it. They participated. And it also, remember back to that grant, there were other elements in the grant. It wasn't just money to have a speaker. That's the direction that they wanted to go. It was actually about a whole career development program for their school district. The students developed a virtual experience for rising ninth graders to learn about the high school and so that they wouldn't be nervous about what's next. And they had a tour of the high school, a physical tour of the campus, but they also had interviews from various groups, clubs, organizations, teachers, and students to talk to them about what they could expect and what they should get involved with. Students also participated by attending and co-presenting at a statewide conference to highlight their program in collaboration with the Career and Guidance Office staff. So they went adults and presented about the success of the program they built. And then the last thing I'll point out, is related to the connections. There were relationships built with these students who normally would not be in a same space together, whether it's because of the friend group that they have, the extracurricular activities that they have, the grades that they're in. They just wouldn't have been together if it weren't for this opportunity. So they had strong relationships and strong connections and really developed community together, which also changed. They named their program the Colonial Ambassadors, which is their mascot, but they just took pride. They wanted there to be a name for it. And so when I think about the splash and the wave, I think they could have had a splash with a great speaker that came in and had the lights and the sound and the music and the all of
and
that.
We do like that.
We love it. I do that when I go speak places, right? Not always, but sometimes, right? It depends on the environment. But how about you have that and the commitment and the connection back? The places where I've had the opportunity to serve, I've seen so much success happen because we've stayed connected. And not because it's connection to me, it's because I get to care about their whole infrastructure and they get to have somebody walk with them through it. And I think that's one thing that's unique about Growing Leaders is, when we connect with folks, we call them partners because we're in partnership with you. You're not engaging with us for a splash.
Yep. It's not a one-time show.
Yeah.
Gina, that's so good and such a perfect example of what we're talking about today. I love that grant goes from affecting a weekend to affecting multiple years and
a whole
hundreds of lives, a whole district. Yeah.
It was really fun to be a part of.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot today.
Yeah.
Lots of stories, lots of ideas, metaphors, habitudes, all of those different things. John Maxwell quotes. We almost have too many ideas. People might be asking, what do I do with all these ideas?
I think they need a DMI.
They do. All right. For those who have not listened before, DMI stands for Don't Miss It. This is where Gina and I identify something from today's episode and we highlight it, underline it, capitalize it, whatever we need to do, shout it from the rooftops in order to give us something to walk away with. So, Gina, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, when I was thinking about the story that you shared, I love acronyms and alliteration. So Bibs and Bobs are going to be with me for a while.
Yeah, those are great.
Bibs and Bobs are going to be with me for a while. But, I think the thing I would hope our listeners take away, it's something I'm going to take away, is that, Julie, she said yes to a few so that they could impact the many.
Yeah.
And she also said yes to a few when the environment was telling her that there aren't any. And she was like, I think different. Yeah. And so I think sometimes we think that the goal before us just might be so big that it might just be better to not start or to hand it off to somebody else. And the reality is the seed has to be planted, So that was a seed planting. That was her watering. That was her nurturing.
Yeah, and she took time to find the right seed that she was going to nurture.
She did.
So,
she did.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight.
How about you?
Well, when I was listening to your story, it just struck me that I think wave leaders recognize the difference in a quick approach versus a long-term approach, right? And this was such exemplified in the story that you told, is if you want to see change, you almost always need to approach that as a multi-year thing, right? And yet, in our world today, right, we're so used to easy solutions and fast solutions that often we'll miss the fact that sometimes change takes time. In fact, we've talked about this for years at Growing Leaders, but we just have to recognize that change is almost never a revolution. It's almost always an evolution, right?
Yep.
Something that happens over a long period of time, because your first idea that you write on the whiteboard is not going to be your best idea, right?
Nope.
It's going to be that idea you wrote on the whiteboard, tried over a couple of months, then you learn a couple things and you make an adjustment, and you try it again, then you keep doing that.
Yep.
And over time, you come up with something that really actually works, and you build a community of people who support it and move towards it. And I think so very often, in fact, it's the whole principle behind this wave idea. So very often, leaders forget that principle. We try something for 6 months or a year, we go, that didn't work, and then we kind of lay it to rest, say a few nice words and put a gravestone over top of it. But in reality, I think we need to build the principle of resilience and know this is a long period of time where we're going to keep trying and trying and trying, adjusting and adjusting and adjusting. And your story was a great example of what happens when you actually do that.
Thanks. We're at the end of our time, but the one thing that came to mind as you were sharing is that I think also we get caught up in that there's not a change that I can report quickly if I say yes to the long term, right? So I need to show as an administrator, I need to show as a teacher that change is happening and this is working. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's also about the way we look at it.
Yeah.
Right? If a goal is a really big goal, like Julie's story, that can't be done in a couple months. It can't be done in a school year. What she can report, though, is the 85 lives that were changed that first year.
Absolutely.
That's what she can report.
Yeah.
Right? And
Take your small win.
Yeah. Sometimes we get so caught up in the big that we forget about the small.
So well said.
Yeah.
So well said. This was fun.
It was. It was a good one.
Yeah.
Well done, sir.
Well done to you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us today on this episode of School on a Mission podcast.
Now, before you hit skip onto your next podcast, we've got a little challenge for you. Grab a pen, a notebook, a sticky note, or even the back of your hand if you have to, and write down one action step you're going to take this week. Maybe it's something you're going to do, something you're going to investigate further, something you want to read more about, or perhaps it's a person you want to meet with. Got it? Okay, perfect. Now, shoot us a DM on social media with that action step. We cannot wait to hear the awesome things that you're up to. Until next time, friends, stay curious, stay bold, and keep leading your school on a mission. The School on a Mission podcast is produced by Growing Leaders, a Maxwell leadership company. You can find out more about Growing Leaders at growingleaders.com. Do you have a story of an epic educational leader that we should hear? We're looking for more stories to tell in Season 2. Send us your epic story by clicking the link in the show notes. This podcast was produced by Angelica Oliver. To find out more about the School on a Mission podcast, head over to schoolonamissionpodcast.com.